I think all the questions you're asking for are kind of asking for a political response rather than anything else. And I mean, in 1997, the Labour Party fought an election campaign, and their biggest problem was what they saw as the right-wing press and the way that the press responds to things in an unreasonable way. And the way that they responded was with rapid rebuttal. They had they were able to, it was the idea that once an idea gets out there, it's the notion that every Labour politician used to say that, a liar's halfway around the world before the truth has got his boots on. And that you have to be able to have a significant community of people that are able to respond very quickly to that and bat it down. And you get it so that I think this is an idea that I wouldn't despair from the point of view of someone working in the public sector in Northern Ireland, because I think there's a growing awareness of this. And certainly at the moment, when the press run these stories that civil servants are wasting public money by sitting and updating Bebo and updating Facebook and all that sort of thing, there aren't many people who respond quickly to it. But when journalists get a bit of stick for doing it, they start to change. And I think, it brings on to a second idea that I think is related to this. That I think, we have all of the traditional political barriers that have always existed in society between left and right and different parties. But I think there is a cross-cutting one. And I think you find, and I find as someone who's politically on the left, that I'll go to events where we talk about these things, and the people who agree with me most are members of the Conservative Party or even UKIP, and the same in Northern Ireland. I found that there's a guy who works for the DUP who absolutely gets all this and really, and would be able to sit in this room and agree with everything here and be interested in coming up with. So I think there are cross-cutting political views, and I think they apply to this. I think they apply to things like copyright. They apply to libel reform. They apply, to the use of open source software. And there are half a dozen different areas where there's a sort of growing group and a movement of people who respond positively.
I think there's also an issue which would be important is cost. Simply governments. One of the people who be against it isn't just the government. It's the big HP, the big providers. They make an awful lot of money from working, and very often those are the projects which suddenly scale up, and they're just on daily rates and they get money. There's people making fortunes. And there's an example last year of somewhere in Birmingham, a project that spent 1.6 million. And maybe it's that people don't understand IT projects and they can suddenly scale up. But they spent 1.6 million on a project, and then they give it out to open source, and it was cheap within a week.
Yes. That was the council website.
The Government Council website, and then there's
£2.8 million DCC DIY. And
then it was, they had the problem that they spent for years on the what they tried to do is get local authorities to run open source, and they had the Laws Project, the local authority, LAWS, I can't remember what it stood for now, but it was essentially the local authorities trying to come up with their own open source projects. I think there's no situation so bad it's not made worse by bureaucrats trying to do these things. So if the positive case. One interesting thing that here's me sounding like an advert for the new government, but one interesting thing they're doing is they've said that all IT procurement documents now have to be for projects above, I think it's 25,000, I can't remember. I've not had time to fully digest it. But I think it's all IT projects have to be put into the public domain. So I think the idea of the big retailer being able to just go and flog something to a gullible IT manager are going down. Certainly, I think local government procurement is a huge problem. And the way that government procures things does need to change. And I think, again, that's something that the new government are on to a good deal more than the old government were.
Can I just pick up the point on selling to the global IT manager? In my experience, it's not the global IT manager, it's the global guy above the IT manager that and they go to the IT manager. Wouldn't it be great if we had this huge monolithic, ED or MS, go and install it? My chum down the rugby club, he sells them, going bad off him, whereas maybe if the IT managers had a bit more say or had a higher position within the organisation, a bit more clout, you might get a bit more creative.
No, let me apologise wholeheartedly now to IT managers, because I know that it's generally not them that they're obstacle. Although in some cases it is. there's also the problem that when you have a management, I mean, people don't get to the top of a lot of organisations by knowing how computers work, and they get to the top of organisations. I mean, the classic is that, again, this is something with the incoming government and the outgoing government is, Mick and I went to meet some people at the COI, the Central Office of Information. And one of the things they're saying is that people that have been ministers for the last 13 years have never bought their own train tickets. You know, if they want to book, they get their secretary to go to Amazon and do it, or if they want. So they've actually not done that sort of, those knotty little debugging things, trying to work out how Posterous works. They've not done those things. And people that don't have permanent secretaries and, people who are often, there's going to be a lot of ministers on the current government who weren't in politics a year ago. You're going to have the numbers mean that actually you've got to have a lot of people at the top of departments who were running their own PC 6 months ago. So there is that question that gives the IT manager a veto. And there's just one I've been working on just in the last week in Northern Ireland. I'm not allowed to say who, but where the IT manager has just got the whole organisation wrapped around his finger, and he's got essentially, why can't we do it? Because I said we can't. So there are some IT managers I'm not apologising to.
Just going back to you were mentioning about all the procurements being in the public domain. Them being in the public domain doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be observable enough for people in the community to say they're spending too much on this.
Yes.
Does there not necessarily have to be a community-run system of saying, right, we've got all this data coming in, this is what the different government organisations are spending on units, and being able to compare that? I mean, do you know if there's any legislation in place for that yet?
Well, I'd be optimistic about that problem being solved. There are some bits of government data that they'll put out there, and transparency is often where government says, there is a haystack. We are prepared to disclose to you that there is a needle in that haystack. And that's often what transparency means. But in other cases, it doesn't. In other cases, it's where you put stuff out there. The fact is that IT suppliers are very competitive. A friend of mine had a website where he was a specialist in building accessible websites. He started off, he was the web manager for a local authority called Clackmanshire, which I had no idea existed until I heard about him. And what he did was he managed to actually get hold of the documents for the procurement for the DTI. The DTI had spent 200 grand building a website that was supposed to be accessible. It meets sort of basic web standards. That means that by accessibility, it means that style and content are separated. It means that you can use a speech browser to look at it. That it has a reasonable amount of XML, and it's structured in such a way that people can read it using other tools. And the DTI spent 200 grand buying this website. They bought it. The site didn't meet any of those standards, but no one in the DTI had enough skills to be able to look at the website and realise that it was accessible because the supplier said it was accessible. Economists have this term called the market for lemons. And the market for lemons is where people can't place value on things because they can't actually understand whether it meets the value or not. And that's a classic example of that. But what this guy did was, he was interested enough, he wanted that contract for himself. Now, if that information is available, I think it's not beyond the wit of small IT providers to start crowdsourcing hostility towards people who make bad procurement decisions. And I would say that there's a reasonable chance it could work.